story of my deconversion is not a story about a tortured soul struggling to find truth. It's not a story about epiphany. It's not a story about indoctrination. And it's not a story that ends in a final coming out that results in alienation or relief or a newfound purpose or sense of belonging. I never had to learn to accept to embrace who I am. I've never really had to overcome bigotry because of my religious convictions. For these reasons, I've never felt that my personal deconversion story was especially worth telling, because it's not especially inspirational or enlightening, nor is it a cautionary tale. It almost feels like telling the story of how I learned to shave. But as I've considered telling the story, I've realized that there are a few little takeaways that some might find in my example. So maybe it is worth telling after all. I was raised the eldest child in a working-class, Irish Catholic, Midwestern family in the 1960s and 70s. My parents had both attended parochial school, but my father had insisted that we go to public school, feeling that his own experience had excluded him from the melting pot. Unfortunately, this meant that we had to give up our Saturday mornings to attend CCD classes to make up for the religion classes we were missing. Other than that and Sunday Mass, I was not exposed to a lot of religion. I don't think we even had a family Bible. We never prayed before meals except for on Thanksgiving Day and probably Easter. Our holiday decorations were all of a secular nature: bunnies and baskets, Santas and trees. But I know that my mother believes in God, and I think my father did too. Although he was clearly not fond of the clergy, he did have a reverence for the church itself. Whenever we drove past the building, he blessed himself, but when the bishop would send a letter for the priest to read during homily asking for donations, my father would roll his one good eye and explain to my mother that he wasn't giving up money his family needed so that a bunch of priests and nuns could visit the Vatican and buy nicer cars than his. I don't know the source of my father's animosity for the clergy, but later in life I was told by a cousin that my uncle, my father's brother, the smart one who had been military intelligence during the Korean War, had been abused, though I didn't ask for specifics, and I knew nothing of this in my formative years. I give this information as background only to demonstrate that there was nothing in my upbringing to either compel me to seek God, neither to drive me to deny God. People that I loved and trusted told me there was a God, and I believed them, or rather I took them at their word. But there were things they told me that I don't know that I ever really believed. Hell was underground and heaven was in the clouds. But planes were in the clouds, and China was what you found if you dug deep enough. Well, they weren't actually physical places. Then how can I go there when I die? Your body doesn't go, your spirit does. But Jesus and Mary, quit asking questions. Someday it will make sense. Only it never really did make sense. Not really. Plus, nobody I knew ever told me stories of their own revelations or epiphanies, at least not while I was forming my own ideas. And then there was TV. My first exposure to atheism was the character of Mike Stivic on All in the Family. Mike had been raised Catholic too, just like me. By contrast, Archie was a Protestant who clearly didn't understand what it was he was defending when he defended his faith.
He would know what was in my heart.
He knows you don't believe in him.
No, but if I did believe in him, Archie, I believe in him because he's a loving and forgiving God.
He won't forgive you for being an atheist, buddy.
He would forgive me anything.
He wouldn't forgive you for showing him disrespect?
Sure he would.
Ah, to you.
He'd even forgive me for doing that.
What, for going to me?
No, for going to him.
Wow! You better find a tailor who can measure you for a lightning rod, buddy.
I watched Archie argue with Meathead, and I watched other things as well. Nature programs about the age of the Earth, and movies about the Greek gods, and dramas about space exploration, and actual space exploration on the news, and I continued to go to church and CCD class and to ask questions that clearly made the instructors uneasy. Still, everyone I knew claimed to be religious. We said prayers in school and read from the Bible before assembly, and then we learned about things church never taught us. Dinosaurs and atoms and other planets. Why didn't God teach about these things? Why didn't Jesus ever mention them? Why was it left to men like Newton and Pasteur and Jonas Salk to discover things that made life easier and eased suffering? Whatever the reason, I was willing to accept that God had his reasons. After all, my grandmother believed it, and she seemed happy. When I was 9, we moved from a rental into our own house. We were now just 2 blocks from church, and I decided that I wanted to be a priest. They didn't seem to work hard, everyone respected them, and the church provided them with everything they could ever want. In preparation for my avocation, I began having ceremonies for dead birds and paying closer attention in church, not to the sermon, but to the rituals. Yet, as I considered the benefits of becoming a priest, I had to ask myself the most important question a priest faces. That question is not, do you believe in God? It's assumed that a priest believes in God, and I did believe, albeit superficially. No, the most important question a priest faces is, why do you believe in God? As I said, I'd never had a personal epiphany or revelation. None of my questions had ever been satisfactorily answered. Skepticism was more a part of my makeup than credulity would ever be. By the time I was 12, I had abandoned my aspirations to the clergy completely. I took to reading books on the occult, to learning what I could about the history of the church and about other world religions. Of course, there wasn't much information available. The local library had precious little, so I gleaned what I could from Monty Python sketches about philosophy and the Inquisition. I read encyclopedia entries on Voltaire and Nietzsche. Slowly, my attitude toward the certainty that Christianity was the answer began to falter. Then my uncle came to visit. Not the smart one whom my father admired, the other brother, the flamboyant, slim uncle who had moved his family to California to try to make it in the movies. He told us stories that made my father and mother cringe. Stories about how he kept bags of pot in his freezer for each of his children so they wouldn't have to sneak it. Stories about how he had played the part of a corpse in a scene in a porn movie set in a mortuary. And then he told us a story about how he had realized he was an atheist. Apparently, one day as he was taking out the trash, he saw one of the neighborhood cats had died and was gathering flies near the garbage bin. He felt sad for the cat and considered saying a prayer, then remembered that animals have no souls. Then he thought, that didn't seem right. They had emotions. They had received the breath of life. Whatever made people alive was the same that made animals alive, and human death was when the soul left the body. So wouldn't animal death be the same? And what about plants and bacteria and yeasts? Weren't they alive? Either everything had a soul or nothing did. This began a process of deconversion for him. He spelled out as much as he thought we could understand, but his stories seemed trivial to me. Who cared if animals had souls? What difference did it make whether or not pine trees went to heaven? Other religions, I knew, answered these questions perfectly well. The Hindus taught of reincarnation. The Eastern faiths considered all of life to be a part of the universe. None of this meant there was no God. It just meant that he lacked an understanding that could rationalize his religious upbringing with what he witnessed in the world. That's when I understood it. We shouldn't have to rationalize our upbringings with what we witness. My uncle was an atheist not because of the reasons he gave, but despite them, and so was I. It wasn't science that had persuaded me to disbelieve. It wasn't philosophy or religion or skepticism that had deconverted me. I believed in space travel because I had seen space travel, and it made sense. I believed in medicine because I had seen medicine work, and it made sense. I didn't believe in God because I didn't believe in God. I was an atheist because I had always found the answers lacking, and I had always been an atheist. I just didn't realize it. I had been told that faith was good, and I wanted to be good. But as I considered it, what was so good about faith? It wasn't faith that had landed us on the moon, it was hubris. It wasn't prayer that had cured polio, it was curiosity. Devotion to God caused war. Devotion to mankind led to peace. By the time I was 13, I was telling my friends that I was agnostic, even as I was confirmed a Catholic for my mother's sake, and even as I stood as my baby cousin's godfather for my aunt's sake. Later in high school, I began to openly challenge religion and declared my atheism, even as I joined the church youth group and volunteered to help repaint the CCD classrooms I had attended as a child. I had no animosity to the church, and the people in it had no apparent animosity toward me. I stopped attending church when high school graduation declared me an adult. I married twice, both times in church, to women who believed in God, and I have raised 3 children, all of whom were free to attend church with their mothers and grandparents. The older 2 have already declared their own skepticism. However, even if they had decided to be believers, that would have been just fine too. All I ever did to persuade them was to honestly answer their questions whenever they chose to put them to me. So that's my story. Today I am a vocal atheist. Not because religion ever harmed me, but because I have seen it harm others, and because I think there may be others like me who are still simply confused by what their society tells them they should believe contrasted with what they witness in reality. There, but for the grace of Providence, go I, after all. Thank you.